You may be coming to this video from one of my other videos, especially the video called Welcome to Gold. That was really kind of an introduction to the idea of buying physical gold. This video is an introduction to the smallest pieces of gold that you are likely to find once you start your journey in actually buying some of these pieces. So this is all about kind of those small coins and bars that you're most often going to encounter in the gold market. If you are new to the channel, my name is Dub C, and I want to thank you for spending a little bit of time with me here today, especially if you are brand new to this field. I know it can be a little bit overwhelming when you first start, and I really appreciate you spending some time with me. Hopefully, we'll try to get rid of some of that confusion and some of that anxiety and make this as much fun as it can possibly be. If you're one of my returning subscribers, thank you guys as always for being with me here. We get to look at some pretty interesting smaller units of gold. We don't see these very often, and I'm going to ask for your help once again towards the end of this video to leave comments, tips, and hints, and other advice that you can give to people who are brand new to buying physical gold. So thank you all for being with me here today. I like to begin my videos with a simple disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer you any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals and rare coins for the last 30 or 40 years. And I like to begin my videos with a couple of definitions that we can be thinking about while we look at these beautiful pieces of gold. Let's start with two of them. One of them is pretty easy to understand. One of them is actually going to require a little bit of thought. So the first one is the concept of a premium. What is a premium? The premium is the amount over and above the value of the gold or silver or platinum that you have to pay in order to buy one of these items. You may be thinking, why would I pay more than the value of the gold? It's a great question. The premium is essentially the person who's selling it to you. It's their profit, and it's also to help cover their expenses. Your idea when you're buying physical gold is to try to get the lowest premium you can, but there are some caveats to that. You want to be thinking about which type of gold you're buying and then trying to get the lowest premium for that type that makes the most sense for you. The premium is simply the amount over and above the value of the precious metals. But that feeds directly into the second concept that's a little bit more complex, and I call this the tiny gold paradox. And what it really means is that while you might be looking for the smallest increment, the smallest unit of gold you can buy, it's important to understand that generally speaking, the smaller the unit, the larger the premium. It doesn't make sense. It's not intuitive. You wouldn't think that that's the case. But so many of us, when we first start buying, are using the smallest unit that we possibly can. And when you think about it, these coins and these bars are all a manufactured item. They're all made in some kind of a factory. And it takes the same amount of effort to make a small gold coin as it does to make a large gold coin. So those premiums involved reflect the profit, but also the manufacturing and everything else that goes into bringing these pieces to market. And it's really only logical that if it takes the same amount of effort and energy to create these pieces, to ship these pieces, to sell these pieces, that the premium would be roughly the same for the very small pieces and the very large pieces. What that means, though, is that when you're buying a small piece, the percentage that the premium costs is almost always going to be higher. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to buy the very smallest unit. We'll talk about those premiums and how it comes into play when you're talking about these vehicles as we look at each one of them. So we're going to start on the left-hand side, and we're going to be looking at 1 gram gold coins. We're going to be looking at 1 gram bars, and then we're going to jump up to 1/10 troy ounce gold coins, and we'll finish it off with a couple of suggestions that you might not be that familiar with, you might not encounter directly, but that I think make a little bit of an interesting opportunity if you feel like going a little bit further into this physical precious metals. Tiny gold, small gold, that's what we're talking about. Let's start with these 1 gram pieces. The gram is a unit of measurement that is metric, and it's one of the ways that we measure precious metals. It's a lot more popular overseas. I'm based in the United States, so the rest of the world is a little bit more comfortable with the gram. This is one of the ways that they weigh and measure many different things. But in the United States, we're slowly becoming acquainted with them. You can see just how tiny that is compared to my fingernail. This is a Chinese coin called a panda, and it's a very, very tiny 1 gram version of these coins. I call these a coin because they are made by a sovereign country. And it's an important distinction. When they're made by a sovereign country, generally speaking, they are kind of backed by the full faith of that government. They also often have a face value, and that matters in some places when it comes to things like taxes and tariffs. But they're also a little bit less likely to be counterfeited. That's not always the case, and it's definitely a good idea to be informed and to be thinking about that. The 1 gram gold coin. This is the Chinese version. Canada puts out a really attractive small 1 gram piece that's part of their gold maple series. And there are other countries that put out these 1 gram gold coins all around the world. They are very popular because they really are an inexpensive way to buy gold, at least theoretically. So the positives of the 1 gram pieces, they can have beautiful designs. They are backed by those governments. There is possibly some collector value. Generally speaking, collectors want pieces that have a unique date on them. They might want to collect those in a series. And because these are dated and made by an actual government, there's a little bit more of a collector demand for them. There are some negatives to these very small 1 gram coins, though, too. Those premiums that we talked about can be quite high. For example, and let's talk about this tiny gold paradox that I spoke about earlier in this video. A 1 gram gold coin definitely seems like it's the smallest unit, and it really probably is the smallest practical unit that you might buy when you first start buying gold. As I'm filming right now, gold is right around $4,000 United States dollars per troy ounce. Now, it's important to remember that gold is an internationally traded commodity, and that price may be considerably higher or considerably lower when you're watching this video. But let's just use that roughly $4,000 value per troy ounce as an illustration. So a 1 gram of pure gold, there are about 31.1 grams per troy ounce. That means that this contains roughly $131 worth of gold. If you were to buy this from a national retailer of gold or a local dealer of gold, they would probably charge you significantly more than that $131. That's the premium that you have to pay. You're looking at a very popular online retailer right now. They have many different options of these 1 gram coins for sale. You'll see some of them priced significantly higher, but let's kind of take out the lowest and the highest and go with those kind of middle ground pieces. From about $160 to maybe $190. So let's call the average maybe $175. At $130 worth of gold, you can see that you're paying a $45 premium per coin to buy these small pieces. That works out to be somewhere around a 35% premium. That is a very significant premium. We'll talk about that in relation to some of these slightly larger vehicles a little bit later too. So the positives and negatives of the 1 gram coins is that these tiny gold paradox really comes into play with these 1 gram pieces. The next group of items that I want you to consider are the 1 gram bars. These differ a little bit from the coins in that they are typically made by a private refinery. This is an example of one made by the Swiss company Pop Swiss, and this is another example that's made by Credit Suisse. So these are small gold bars, and you notice that they come in kind of a package here. We call these assay cards. Let's talk about those a little bit too as we talk about these 1 gram options that you have. The positives of the 1 grams, they tend to be kind of generic, right? They're not made by a government, so they don't have a face value, even though you would never spend a gold coin for its face value. They aren't backed by that full faith of the government that produced them because they're made by a private company. All of that means that they are generally a little bit less expensive. Those premiums can be significantly lower on these 1 gram gold bars. And there are other options for larger sizes for almost all of these. The different series that are made by governments come in pieces as large as 1 troy ounce or larger. Gold bars come in pretty much any size you want. Remember, we're talking about these really tiny introductory pieces to the gold market. The negatives. I am not really a big fan of the assay cards. Once again, that's kind of these plastic or paper holders. You're not really supposed to take the bars out of these assay cards, Modern gold bars like these have a very shiny mirror-like proof surface. We call that proof or proof-like sometimes. And that's really susceptible, gold being quite soft, to scratches, to fingerprints, to dropping them and making dents in them. So you're really kind of supposed to leave those within the assay cards. The assay cards also have some information about them that makes them a little bit more saleable in the future. Good idea to always be thinking about that exit strategy if and when you ever decide to sell. So they've got assay cards. Some people might see that as a positive. I kind of see it as a negative. I'd rather have my pieces available for me to weigh and touch and hold. And again, it's not quite as appropriate with a small gold bar like this. They don't have the protections of the gold coins that are made by a sovereign country. They don't typically have a collector value. There are some exceptions to that, but just as a kind of a general rule, these are made by a private company and very few people collect the pieces made by refineries. There are some exceptions for holiday bars or a significant occasion, but we're, again, just kind of talking about generic pieces. And also, we mentioned the exit strategy earlier. If these are made by a private company, wherever you are geographically, that company may not be quite as well known as other companies. You've got an example of a bar that was made overseas here. It can make it a little bit more difficult to sell these pieces. We're talking about when you sell them to a knowledgeable dealer primarily. They're going to understand most of this, but if you were to sell it to another individual and they're not familiar with the refinery that made these bars, they may be a little bit more reluctant to buy those pieces. It's a good idea to always kind of be thinking about that in the back of your head. So 1 gram coins, 1 gram bars. I mentioned that there are other sizes available, but again, we're talking about the smallest units you're likely to encounter. So let's jump up to the 1/10 troy ounce coins. Again, precious metals in the United States and lots of the Western world are weighed and measured in troy ounces. You don't necessarily need to know a whole bunch of the specifics about that because luckily they are also valued in those troy ounces. If you go to a website to look up the value of gold, it will generally tell you the price per troy ounce. So if they're measured and weighed in troy ounces and fractions of troy ounces, it becomes pretty easy to determine how much they cost and how much you can sell them for. I've got examples of several other sovereign countries who also put out 1/10 troy ounce vehicles. We've got some United States of America gold eagles. The American gold eagle is 1 troy ounce of gold. These are 1/10 troy ounce. You've got some South African Krugerrands. These are 1/10 troy ounce Krugerrands. Here's an example of the Canadian maple. I mentioned that was a very popular series that comes from Canada, a 1/10 troy ounce. And this is a version of an Australian piece called the Australian nugget. This is also 1/10 troy ounce. So you can see you have lots of different options when it comes to these pieces. It really kind of depends on what you prefer in terms of the aesthetic of the piece. And I am a big fan of stacking those pieces that appeal to me. There's something special about that. But also geographically, wherever you're located in the world, it often makes more sense to buy and sell those pieces that are produced regionally, if not locally. In the United States of America, we have the 1/10 American Eagles. Those tend to be the most popular. It may be the Canadian maple in Canada that is most popular, or the Britannia in the UK, or the Libertad in Mexico. It really kind of depends on where you are. Lots of different countries make these 1/10 and larger troy ounce denominated vehicles and fractions thereof. The nice thing about these 1/10 troy ounce pieces is because gold is priced in troy ounces, it's pretty easy to determine how much 1/2 troy ounce is worth, a quarter, or these 1/10 troy ounces. Remember, we said we were thinking about kind of a theoretical $4,000 per troy ounce. So a 1/10 troy ounce would be 1/10 of that, or $400. It makes it very easy. But again, we have premiums on these pieces, so you're not likely to be able to buy them for that $400. You'll have to pay a higher premium. Some positives and negatives when we talk about these 1/10 pieces. There are beautiful designs. They come from all sorts of countries around the world. They are backed by the full faith of those sovereign countries, generally speaking. They have some potential collector value. Some of these are made in quite small numbers, which means that there is at least the potential that they'll have some collector value. The flip side of that is that that collector value and that sovereign government's kind of promise as to the quality of these pieces also makes them cost a little bit more. They are going to have a higher premium than, for example, the gold bars do because they don't have those protections or added benefits. Higher price point also. If we're comparing them to the 1 gram pieces, which are significantly smaller, remember we said that that was somewhere about $130 worth of gold. These have somewhere around $400 worth of gold, again, with our illustration purposes. So your entry level to get into these pieces is going to be greater. That can be seen as a negative to some people who are really just getting into this on a limited budget. And if we said that the 1/10 or the 1 gram bars roughly contains $128 worth of gold, but it has a significant premium, these pieces have a premium also. But remember that tiny gold paradox. Generally speaking, the larger the unit, the lower the percentage of that premium. And that's definitely the case when it comes to these 1/10 ounce pieces. So we're going to take a look at some of these that are currently being offered by that same online retailer, and you can see that they have a selection of these pieces too. How much do the premiums cost on these 1/10 ounce units? It really kind of depends on what you're looking at. But again, we're kind of looking for those pieces in the middle in this illustration. Let's say they cost between $470 and $500. That means that our average is going to be about $485. Again, if they contain a roughly $400 worth of gold, you're talking about a $75 to $85 premium on these pieces. Now, that is definitely higher than the premium on the small pieces, but remember, it takes roughly 3 of these small pieces to equal one of these large pieces. And we said the premiums on the small pieces alone was somewhere around $45 per coin. So if you multiply that by 3, then you're talking somewhere north of $120 in premium for the same amount of gold contained in one of these pieces that has a premium that is maybe a little bit more manageable at somewhere around $75 or give or take, somewhere in that area. So you can tell that the premiums, while they might be larger on these pieces, when you're looking at it as a percentage of the value of the gold, it tends to be significantly smaller. The small gold or the tiny gold paradox. The smaller the unit, generally speaking, the larger the premium. And remember, when you're paying that premium, you're not buying gold. That's just the profit or the spread between how much the dealer is selling them to you for. So that's more of your dollars or whatever currency you're using. That's not going into gold. We want those premiums to be as low as we can get them. That's the idea of the tiny gold paradox. So if you wanted to stop here, you've got some great options. Just beware of that tiny gold paradox, the fact that the premiums on these smaller pieces will tend to be larger. Now, you can do some comparison shopping and try to find these pieces with a low premium, and in fact, we'll talk about that in just a moment. But if you wanted to stop with the 1 gram gold coins, the 1 gram gold bars, or the 1/10 troy ounce gold coins, this is a fine selection of introductory pieces to the gold market. But if you want to come with me a little bit further, I've got some other options that might require a little bit more thought, but they have a little bit more potential too. I am a big fan of the Mexican 20th century gold pieces. We're looking at a fun pile of these here. Mexico created millions of these small gold coins in the 20th century. We've got a 2 peso here and a 2.5 peso gold coin. Again, you would not spend these pieces for their face value. These are just an easy way to buy gold. And the interesting thing about these pieces, one of the interesting things about these pieces, is that they tend to be restrikes. A restrike is a coin that is backdated, so that even though it may have been made in the 1970s or in the 1980s, these pieces often have the date of 1945 on them. What does that matter? Well, they're still technically a coin, and they're still made by the government of Mexico, but they have very little, if any, collector value. We said before that people often collect these based on their date. If all of the dates are going to be the same, 1945 or whatever date is the typical restrike date for these pieces, then they lose their collector value, but they still have that gold value, and that can work in your advantage. The things I liked about the 2 and the 2.5 pesos is they're really tiny size, but they are actually coins. There's something kind of special and magical about them. You may not feel that, but I know a lot of people within the stacking community will always have an affinity to these pieces because for a lot of us, these were really the first small gold coins that we were able to afford and start buying. They are adorable, and there's just something kind of neat about them. But there are some negatives to these as well. When we are talking about the 1 gram pieces or the 1/10 troy ounce pieces, those have a very specific weight, and it's very easy to figure their gold content and their value based on the value of gold on any given day. With these pieces, it's a little bit trickier. These are made out of 90% pure gold and 10% copper. That's not an unusual alloy when you start getting deeper into the gold market. And it also is intentional. These pieces were made traditionally to circulate. This was made at a time when these pieces would actually have been spent. We don't spend these gold coins at all anymore. But there's still something nice about having these have an alloy of copper because it makes them a little bit more durable. You can see that I don't have a problem picking these up. I'm not as concerned about these getting any kind of marks on them as I would be with these pieces that are sealed in these plastic holders because their surfaces are so delicate. So that's one of the benefits of these, I think, but you may think of it as a negative. And they also don't have the precise weights when we're talking about the gold market. The 2 peso contains 1.499 grams of pure gold. The 2.5 peso, 1.875 grams of pure gold. It's not really tricky to try to figure their value, but it does usually require a calculator, and that may throw some people off a little bit. But I think the benefits to these pieces, if you can find them with those low premiums, and these pieces tend to have very low premiums, I think the benefits outweigh the slight negatives to them. And I've got one other option that kind of flies beneath the radar. In fact, I actually made a video about this not too long ago, and that is the Austrian Ducat. I called that video the Gold Stack Hack, and I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. I said before that I like the aesthetic of certain gold coins, and these are really beautiful. When you think of a gold coin, this is kind of the image that will pop into most people's minds. The ducat was a small gold coin, roughly the size of an American nickel, that circulated for a couple of hundred years. It was kind of the typical gold coin of a lot of countries. In 1915, Austria, the country of Austria, continued to make these, but they kept that 1915 date on them. There's another example of a restrike. So Austria continues to make these to this day with that earlier date on them. So it's an interesting coin. It's a beautiful design coin. You can see that date up there at the very upper right, or upper left rather, 1915. Even though this piece could have been struck 30 or 40 years ago, or could have been struck as recently as just 5 or 10 years ago, they all have that date. The Austrian ducat is a very well-known and trusted coin in much of Europe. In America, they made pretty good headway, but we don't really think about them very often as much as we do some of these other options. What are the benefits of the ducats? It's important when you first get into this that you feel excited by it. And if you're not going to feel excited by a coin that's that small, then maybe something that's a little bit larger will keep your interest, right? There is something kind of fun about something that you can see with the naked eye, especially if you're getting old like I am. These pieces are very, very thin, but that just means that you can make them slightly larger, and I think that that's a benefit. What else is a benefit? They often have incredibly low premiums. These are often the lowest premium gold piece that you can buy. Keep that in mind. We'll talk about that again. They contain 0.11 of a troy ounce of pure gold. Now, we talked about the 1/10 troy ounces. If you want to think about that in terms of its decimal, that would be 0.1 of a troy ounce. These are 0.11 of a troy ounce. You can see that these contain about 10% more gold than the 1/10 troy ounce pieces that we talked about earlier. Why does that matter? That's the Gold Stack Hack. And again, I'll leave a link to that video down below. I'll leave a link so you can watch that video if you have any interest. But these pieces at 0.11 of a troy ounce often cost very close to the same amount as these pieces at 0.1 of a troy ounce. So if you want to think of it in terms of slowly building your stack out of these smaller pieces, you only need about 9 of these coins to equal a troy ounce, technically 0.99 or 99% of a troy ounce, versus 10 of these pieces at zero point 0.1 of a troy ounce, 10 of them required to make a full troy ounce. And because they cost very close to the same amount, it's almost like getting one of these for free when you wind up paying for them. It's a little bit more of a complex idea, but I am still a big fan of the Austrian Ducat. Some people will tell you that some dealers are a little bit more reluctant to buy these pieces, but I've been doing this for a very long time, and I've never encountered a dealer who didn't know what an Austrian Ducat was. They are a very common gold piece that's been made in the millions. So the Austrian Ducat, again, check out that video down below if you have interest in doing that gold stack hack and a little bit more interest in these pieces. I think they're kind of fun. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I would have some tips and some hints, so I'll just go through some of those. And again, I'd like to ask my current subscribers to leave their hints down below too. Let's see if we can share some information with people who are a little bit new to this. Comparative shopping. I mentioned that earlier. There are a pretty big handful of online bullion retailers in the United States. These are big companies that buy and sell millions of dollars worth of material every day. I think it's a good idea to check them for their prices, but comparative shopping, you want to compare the exact same thing. Not every dealer will have the same premiums on pieces. They'll have dealer inventory that slides back and forth in terms of its quantity, and generally speaking, the more they have, the lower the premium. So one dealer may have 1/10 eagles at a certain price. The next dealer may have them considerably more or less expensive based on the premiums that they're charging. So try to find the lower premium, but always compare the exact same thing. When you're doing comparison shopping, look at the cost for actually buying these pieces. Not only do a lot of places charge the premium, but they may charge you for using a credit card or a wire transfer or a check. So there may be associated fees with how you are buying it, and not every dealer charges the same amount for those. So definitely check into that too. That can make a significant difference in the cost that you're paying for these pieces. Comparative shopping. If you are going to be buying online, there is a really good chance that the bullion dealer that you're looking at, their website, they may have a price listed on their website, but if you call them, that price may be different. More significantly, they often have an eBay store. If you're familiar with buying online and you're not intimidated by using a website, check eBay to see if that bullion retailer has an online presence through eBay, because often they will discount them a little bit more on their eBay stores, and sometimes they'll offer things like free shipping too, or maybe a slightly better date. It's always a good idea to check their eBay stores. You never know what you're going to find, and maybe it'll save you a couple, 3% on top of it too. Another great piece of advice. I like the idea of shopping locally. If you have that option, not everybody's got local dealers that they can go to. And that's important because if you do decide to buy these pieces through an online retailer, chances are you're probably going to wind up selling them locally if and when the time comes for you to exit these positions. So if you are making inroads with a local dealer, then at least you'll have a little bit of knowledge about where they're located, what they're buying, and how easy it is to work with them. It's also kind of a good idea to check their inventory, because often dealers turn their inventory very quickly, and something very interesting might have just walked in the store right before you came in. You might have been looking for a Canadian maple, wishing that you could buy an American Gold Eagle, and sure enough, they've got the American Gold Eagle sitting right there. So establish a rapport with your local dealer if you've got a local presence. I think that's a really good idea. Look for non-restrike dates. This is a little bit more complex. We said that some of these Mexican pieces always bear the date of 1944 or 1945, regardless of when they were made. The Austrian Ducats almost always have that 1915 date on them. That's a typical restrike. But the truth is that a lot of these pieces were made as circulating coins a long time ago, and sometimes you can find these pieces with their non-restrike date when they were actually a circulating coin. often those pieces will have a little bit of numismatic value, that's coin collector value, and a lot of dealers don't really think of it that in those terms. So if you think that you're sophisticated enough to check those dates, as long as the quality of the coin is the same as the ones that are being offered to you as restrikes, buying those pieces that are non-restrike coins can actually have a little bit of benefit too. I know it's a little bit more of an esoteric idea, but you can handle it, I think. So you can look for those non-restrike dates. Don't remove the gold bars from their assay cards. It's going to make them a lot less saleable. People will be a little bit less reluctant or more reluctant to buy them once they've been removed for those cards. A good idea to keep them in those cards. The best advice I can give you as a new buyer of precious metals is that there's no such thing as a free lunch. If you find a 1/10 gold eagle being offered online, and remember we said theoretically that $4,000 price means that these 1/10 gold eagles contain about $400 worth of gold. There is no way in the world someone is going to sell one of these to you for $200 or $300. That's not the way precious metals work. These are things that are bought and sold internationally around the clock 24 hours a day. And while you can save a little bit of money by checking those premiums or the payment method pricing or the shipping and handling fees, you're not going to find a significant discount on gold unless somebody is scamming you. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Don't get scammed. Don't buy something that is too good to be true. Definitely work with an online retailer or a local retailer, those online retailers that have a good established presence and a lot of positive feedback, a local dealer who knows what they're talking about and is part of your community. And I mentioned that my current subscribers might leave us some tips. Also, definitely read through the comments at the bottom of this video to see if there are other ideas that might appeal to you. I can't necessarily vet those ideas, but it's always a good idea to get a second and third opinion, especially if it doesn't cost anything. Let's hear those ideas from my current subscribers, see if we can help out these folks who are brand new to buying gold. Tiny gold and the tiny gold paradox. Let me know what you think about this. If you have questions about any of the vehicles, the units that we talked about here, definitely leave a question down below. If any of the terms are confusing or if I didn't make sense on something, leave that question down below and I'll try to answer it. I'm a big fan of saying, if you've got a question, there's a good chance somebody else has a question. Let's see if we can answer it for everybody. Go ahead and click on that subscription button and hit the notification bell too, because I premiere new videos pretty much every Friday. And I'm often there during the premiere to watch the video with you, to talk with you about it as it's playing for us all for the first time. But more important, I often go live immediately after those video premieres. A live stream is just a chance to interact with me directly and lots of other people in the community. These are a little bit more energetic and fast-paced. They are a fantastic way to start the weekend. The floor is generally wide open. Often we talk about what we just talked about in the video, but as long as it's dealing with coins and bullion in some capacity, the floor is open and I encourage people to leave comments and ask questions. It's a lot of fun. I really look forward to those live streams. So if you are watching this video with me on a Friday, definitely say hi, but come to the live stream immediately after it. Let's continue this conversation. I like to end my videos by saying, always be learning. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.